Count Basie's Orchestra featuring tracks by Sammy Nestico. We're going to start with the Moten Swing.
Oh, very nice.
Jazz on jazz on jazz. Hello and welcome to Let's Pod This. My name is Andy Moore. It's good to be with you, listeners. We're back. It's been a couple of weeks. I apologize. I think you all understand that it's a busy time of year and that sometimes it is tough to find time to sit in a podcast studio and discuss what's happening in the world. And I know that you care about it, listeners. I also know that you are probably overwhelmed, as many of us are. The meme going around about it's only 2 weeks to the election and it's like someone with a cigarette. I'm sure it's a clip from a TV show or a movie that I don't know, but everybody I know who works in politics shared it yesterday. And so what better time, what better opportunity for us to rejoin the conversation than today? I'm joined by two esteemed guests. And I don't know if this one's a guest, but I'd like to welcome back to the pod your friend and mine, Dr. Scott Melson. Hello, sir.
What is up, man?
It's been a few months.
It has been a minute.
Or a year and a half or something.
But you know what? It feels like I've never left. I feel like my ass cheek is still imprinted on the chair.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's fair.
It feels good to be back here on a Friday afternoon.
I still refer to it as our podcast, even if you've been on hiatus for a minute.
Yeah.
But that's the way life goes, right?
Yeah, right.
We all have seasons in the sun.
Indeed, it's been a busy year of a lot of personal stuff, then a lot of professional stuff, then more personal stuff and more professional stuff, and so it's been a good year. A lot of things have happened, but it's nice. It feels real good to be back 2 weeks before the end of the world.
Right. Right. Exactly. We are also joined by a friend of the pod, a return guest and a good friend of ours, Dr. Keith Gaddie, who is the Hoffman Chair of the American Ideal at Texas Christian University, otherwise known as TCU. Go Frogs. Welcome back to the show, Keith.
And it's good to be back. And Scott, it's good to see you again.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, it seems like it was, like I said, literally 5 minutes ago we were doing this, and here we are again.
Yeah, and that was a whole other studio.
Yeah, and the thing is, that's a good conversation. You walk in, you see friends, and, oh, yeah, I saw you 5 minutes ago, and I was 7 years. Okay,
Right.
fine. Where were we? Right?
Yeah, that's right. Well, there was a pandemic in between there, and a few things happened, but
A coup.
Right. Keith, you at the time you came before, you were at OU. You've since left. Now you're at TCU down in Fort Worth. And as a native Texan who has lived in Oklahoma for most of his life, I appreciate the duality there of your life now. And I don't appreciate your commute back and forth when you have to drive down there. But we're really excited to have you. And I think the plan for today is to talk about democracy in general. I think this is the thing that we always talk about when we're together, particularly if there's some Kentucky bourbon involved. So first, I think it's important, I don't know if it is, just to say, like, we're recording this on Friday, October 25th in the afternoon. And so as I too often do, I have two tabs open on my browser, one for 538 and one for Nate Silver's the Silver Bulletin website with their models. They're not the only models, but they're the models that I check the most, arguably trust the most, to the extent that I trust any of these numbers, and we'll get into this. But the end of the sentence is the same as it has been for the last month or more. It's tied. It's roughly tied. Keith, does anybody really know what's about to happen to America's democracy?
No. But we can sit here and guess, and that's the fun thing. That's what we do, right? We supposify.
Yeah.
And it's fun. It's funny you're in there on Nate Silver's legacy and on his blog, right? Nate's dad Brian's a friend of mine. He's a retired professor at Michigan State University, and Nate Silver has been playing around with multiple regression models since he was about 9 years old.
I can see this as a child. This makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, there's something, there's a savant-like quality to this, but he has always been scientifically curious and always played with models and has as much experience as anybody out there. And he drives political scientists nuts because he's not one. Mm-hmm. And he drives pollsters nuts because he's not one. But they're not upset with what he does. They're upset that they're not doing it.
Right.
So let's let's have a little bit of grace here, okay? If any of us had done this, we'd be happy to, and everybody would hate us, and that's fine. Okay, so be it. So be it. Go with God. But no one knows what's going to happen. We can kind of guess which direction things may go in. But I was giving a talk to a political action committee the other day in an industrial pack. And I walked in and I said, you all want to talk about the elections? We'll take 10 minutes and talk about that. But it comes down to this. On Tuesday night, do what you normally do and go to bed and get a good night's sleep, because you're not going to know the result of the election until Saturday. And even then you won't know the result of the election, because then we start what is now the permanent phase of American politics, which is we get to go to the litigation. Okay? So we're going to have an election, and then we're going to have litigation, and then we're going to have hyperbole, and then we're going to have a certified result, and then we're going to go to Congress, and we're going to have an electoral college vote, and it'll be certified, and then there will be a transition. There will be a new president. It's just a question of whether or not we're putting a retread tire on or a brand fresh new tire on, but we're going to get a new president. But right now, everything is so close. Everything can go 53-47 either way in terms of probability.
Well, in my understanding, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but because so many of these polls, national polls and the swing state polls are so close, that a standard polling error, like we know there is a polling error, we just don't know how much and what direction. But a standard polling error in either direction could mean a relative landslide for Harris or Trump. Mm-hmm. And I find some anxiety around that. I don't know about you, Scott.
Yeah, so it was either I think it was either New York Times, maybe it was Nate. One of the models that earlier this week they ran their simulations. They did 10,000 simulations, whatever. And the modal outcome, right, the most common outcome in those however many thousand simulations were that Trump won all 7 swing states. That happened 24% of the time, right? But the second most common outcome was Kamala Harris won all 7 swing states. That happened 15% of the time, which means that 39% of the outcomes in those simulations were a relative electoral landslide. You just don't know which direction, right? Mm-hmm. So for comparison, in 2016, Silver's model had that Donald Trump had like a 27, a 30, 33, somewhere in there, kind of right around 30% chance, 30% probability of winning the election and becoming president in 2016. And obviously that happened. So right now, there is a higher probability of a relative electoral landslide than there was of Donald Trump winning in 2016. So if you're trying to think like how likely is that outcome, then that's one point of reference. The other thing is, to your point, Andy, like, so a standard, if you guys, if the numbers here, if I'm fuzzy on the numbers, correct me, but a standard in a standard election cycle, the standard poll error is going to be like 3 points, right? Yeah. 3 points. Yeah. You just don't know which direction, and there's no correlation in polling error from presidential cycle to presidential cycle, right? So the fact that the polling error in 16 and 20, was in favor of Donald Trump does not mean that's going to be that way this time. And in fact, I would say there are some reasons, like there are some valid reasons to think that it might not be, but you can't prove that, right? You don't know that until
afterwards. I mean, just regression towards the mean would indicate that it could be that way.
Exactly. It could be. Well, the other thing is that some of the pollsters are trying to correct that polling error by changing what their methodology is to try and make sure that they don't underestimate Donald Trump's support this time around. But the question is, and again, you don't know this until it's over, right? Are they doing that too much, right? Are the polls that we see now, are they an actual representation of the true state of the race, or is there still kind of fuzziness in this model? And I think the other thing that is like a whole kind of, throws a wrench in the gears here, the Trump campaign made a decision earlier this year that, I don't know if it's a good decision or bad decision, but a lot of the money, like millions and millions of dollars that normally would have been invested in ground game and turnout operation in a lot of these states, they decided to invest in lawyers and legal experts and poll watchers in an effort in anticipation that they were going to be challenging the electoral results. So does that lack of investment in on the ground infrastructure, does that translate to a polling error? I mean, I literally, I have no idea.
But they also outsource some of the ground game to the PAC that Elon Musk is running. Right?
Yeah, but that's also illegal, though, right?
We'll find out.
Nothing's illegal anymore, so don't worry about that. It's, as I told my dad once in 2020, he said, well, are you sure that like there wasn't shenanigans in this election and Biden winning, I said, Dad, you know what I've been involved with. Don't you think if the election was fixed, I'd be involved? Right?
That's where the money is.
That's where the money is.
If the election
Absolutely.
had been fixed, I would have done it. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I'd have a new car, right? Yeah. That's a tricky question, and it was Nate Silvers who the one that, because you and I texted about that 39%. The other thing that is throwing, I think, a lot of people for a loop, and maybe me, if I'm totally honest, is that because it's so close, all of these unlikely outcomes are like slightly more likely, right? Like there's like I was just reading, there's like a 8 out of 100, so an 8% chance that the election is decided by a recount, like where the winner's margin is less than 0.5% in a decisive state like Pennsylvania. And so like an 8% chance is still very small, but if I had an 8% chance of winning the lottery, if I played, I would definitely play the lottery, right? And so, but that's only because it's so close in the polling, and we don't know what it'll look like on election day.
So this is where you get into the weird stuff. Like, generally speaking, in high-profile races, the political markets, the betting markets, usually do a decent job of guessing the outcome. But here's the funny thing about them. Those betting markets can be bet on by people from outside of the country, and they can't be bet on by people in states where you can't gamble online. So we don't really get a representative sense of where the electorate, even where expertise is. So the money just kind of bids in some ways. And they're actually in a good position where you can have shenanigans and play games with them. And you've seen a lot of very large dollar bets being made in Trump's direction, but they're mainly coming from out of the country. So I'm not putting a lot of stock in the betting markets this cycle.
Well, and we talked about this on our last episode, and for listeners' benefit, right now on Predict It, Trump is 61 to Harris's 44, and on Polymarket, which is the largest one that Nate consults with, everybody knows this now, Trump is at 64 and Harris at 36, so a bigger difference. But to your point, while these used to be a somewhat decent indication of public sentiment, that is not the case when whales are dumping 7 digits into this to try to make a quick buck, right?
Yeah.
Especially whales who can afford to lose 7 digits if they think they might gain 8.
Well, the thing is, are they even trying to make a quick buck, or are they trying to Are they trying to move the line, right?
Right.
If they're trying to move the money line, right, and by moving that, therefore influence public opinion,
Right.
Well, the thing is, you can find any model that works. If Texas beats OU in an election year game, the Democrats win the presidency in 11 of 14 instances. We can find anything that predicts the outcome you want. Okay?
Can I hang my hat on that? I might sleep better tonight.
That's funny. Well, yeah, that's funny. But I mean, correlation is not causation, right? Like
Exactly.
that's fun.
But it's fun.
Well, so to pull out, we could probably spend the next hour and a half talking about the horse race here, and that's why we led with we don't know.
Yeah.
What you should do is do what you always do: vote, go to bed. We'll find out.
Enjoy life. Yeah.
I will say, because I don't know if we'll have another episode before the election, but listeners, if you don't know what to do with your life on election night, there's watch parties that candidates are having. We are not doing the election night show. We don't do it in presidential years because we have a lot of antacids to consume. But this year, somewhat unexpectedly, I will be on Oklahoma City's Fox 25 News from 6:30 to 10:30 as some sort of political analyst. Keith, you've done this kind of thing before. I have not. I don't know what to expect, but I did give my interns a very long list of data points that I want them to source and give to me before election night. So listeners, if you are at home and you want to watch TV, may I suggest turning into OKC's Fox 25 if you're in OKC.
I will be at home, and I will vote, and I will go home. I will not go to bed.
Yeah, Scott will be texting me to feed me information while I'm on air. Right, I appreciate that. We'll have a Slack chat going. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah, I'll probably be in Fort Worth seeking refugee status, but it's
That's right.
actually, real quick before we get away from this,
Yeah.
there's a hell of a Senate race going on down there between Ted Cruz and Colin Allred.
Yeah.
Is it as close as it seems like it might be?
It is. It's Cruz is consistently 2 points ahead if you look at the non-public, non-campaign polling, and there's a lot of money going in there trying to shift those last 2 points. But I mean, what a candidate for the Democrats with Colin Allred, a biracial, Baylor running back with a law degree who's in Congress. The guy is amazing when he campaigns. And what's interesting in Texas is Texas will still go for Trump. It's a 6-point margin down there. But the big unknown in Texas right now is what black turnout looks like, because you have a black woman running for president and a black candidate for U.S. Senate. Black candidates at the top of the ticket are usually good for turnout. So this is the big challenge with all the models right now, is we're not really sure how to model Georgia, how to model Texas, how to model Louisiana.
Nebraska.
Yeah, the black voter in Nebraska, right? Yeah.
I just meant or I guess it's Montana, that's what I'm thinking of. But John Tester's race up there is somewhat competitive.
How many text messages a day do you get from John Tester? Because I think he and I are dating now. I hear from him so often.
And I love John Tester. I love John Tester.
Oh, absolutely.
I want him to win, but yeah, man, we gotta lay off the. He's like, if you give me $5, that's gonna make all the difference. No, it's not.
No, it's not.
That's not.
What's interesting about so
like
I'm looking
for Sally Struthers to call you up about a child or something, right? Yeah.
I'm looking at 538's page about the Texas Senate race, about this race in particular. So they've got Cruz at 82, Allred at 18, but so that's a big margin, or probability. However, the polling is like much closer, right? So Cruz is polling at 50.4, Allred's at 45.5, so just about 5 points separate them. And then when you get down into the fundamentals, the actual polling average is only like 3, maybe 4 points. The thing that really shifts it is expert ratings, which I put less stock in, right?
Yeah, for sure.
They're smart people. Keith, you're one of them. Scott, you are also, but
mostly him, though.
Right, mostly him. But
I'm no Alan Lichtman, though. I'm sorry.
But the fact that, and I don't know how they have it weighted in here, but that is, the expert rating is notably higher than the polling average. And so that's a lot of folks that are trying to lay their reputation on the line for a race that they could eat crow later and apologize and explain why they were wrong or why they were right in a different way. But I do think that like the race is probably closer than what the website would indicate.
Well, two things can be true, right? The race can be very, very close, and also the overwhelmingly most likely outcome is that Ted Cruz wins.
Yeah,
Ted Cruz wins.
Yes.
Like, there's those things aren't mutually exclusive, and I think it's one. And again, I'm not disputing the closeness of the race, and I actually would probably agree with Keith that like I think probably it's even closer than that 3 points, right? But it's one of those things. I think if you're, and again, I'm with you. I don't put a lot of stock in the expert opinions, but it's like, if you asked me that, right, like what's the likelihood that the Democrat's going to win a Senate race in Texas? I'm going to say, man, until it happens, until it happens, I'm not going to pick it. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I mean, the most recent poll is from Emerson College just earlier this week. It's 47-48. So like it's super close.
Neck and neck. I mean, and within the margin of error, right?
Yeah.
So,
right.
I mean, I think the preferences are baked in Texas. It's all about mobilization. And I think that's the country. The preferences are baked in. It's a mobilization question right now. Are you going to show up or not?
Yeah. On this, the most recent episode of the 538 Politics podcast, they're doing like 3 a week. So the one that came out, I think today or yesterday, they ask what is the most important data point to consider. And they ask a whole bunch of pollsters and experts about this, from Julia Anzari and Ann Seltzer in Iowa, and in fact Ann said that very thing, that in her mind it is a turnout question. Like we know who people are going to vote for, but if you
just got to get your voters to show up and vote.
Yeah, like if the unlikely voters turn out the right ones, right? Like if the Harris ones turn out or the Trump ones turn out, and it's looking back the last 2 cycles, Trump has won a lot of the unlikely voters, right?
So there's a question. I'm built off that. So do you know, Keith? Well, let me back up. So part of Trump's like secret sauce, right, is that there are people who will show up to vote for him, right? That don't show up to vote for anything else, right? Like they're not going to vote for city council, right? They may not vote for any of the race, but they're going to show up and vote for him. Is in the last 2 cycles, was the turnout by those people driven in any meaningful way by a campaign turnout operation, or was that driven by, I'm just going to show up and vote for Trump because he's my guy?
Okay, this goes back to the earlier question about ground game. And in 2016, it was all about contacting. the Trump campaign had a very aggressive contacting campaign that was built upon some very weird dynamics that even Bill Bishop couldn't have imagined. Because Bill Bishop, the big sort, was the guy that gave us micro-targeting, or got us to think about it. They were doing things like finding people they were getting lists of people who had like Kroger discount cards and things like that, and we're crosswalking those with zip codes and vehicle registration figures, and that's how you go after your pickup truck voter and things like that. So it was a highly selective, highly targeted effort to mobilize voters in a few key swing states. Don't know if they've got that capability going on right now. But what's funny is both of them, both Harris and Trump, are banking on having a demographic turnout that's not high turnout. Either you're going to have a disproportionate mobilization of black voters and young voters or disproportionate mobilization of racists. This is your choice. We're at the point now where we don't even have to mince words about this.
Right.
Okay, that's really the difference right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and so it's interesting because Trump's campaign co-chairs, there's two people, Chris LaCivita and Susie Wiles. So Chris LaCivita is famous because he was the architect of Swift Boat Veterans for Truth, right? Mm-hmm. He is a like bare knuckle, hardcore political brawler who has had the reputation in GOP circles for 30 years. Like, he doesn't care what he's got to do. He's got to do what he's got to do to win. Yeah. So that's Chris LaCivita. Susie Wiles, she has come up in Florida politics over the last 25 years, and micro-targeting in Florida has been my understanding anyway, is a really chief architect of the kind of remaking of Florida from a swing state to a GOP stronghold. Yeah. And so it seems like if Susie's running things, then what you're talking about in terms of micro-targeting would be an integral part of their strategy. Mm-hmm. But it seems like they haven't put the money into that they would need to at a national level. Maybe
he's got some legal bills to pay.
Yeah, well, and also, I mean, the Trump campaign is still having issues with fundraising. He was completely lighting up large dollar donors in a meeting the other day, doing that thing he does where he cries about things, right? There's not a lot of room left for objectivity and, there are qualities about this candidate that are unique in human history, and they're all on display. And somehow it's attractive to people. I don't understand it.
Yeah, well,
I've tried.
Ezra Klein had a podcast episode the other day, not to be this like liberal elite guy that listens to these podcasts, but I am. And I appreciate smart people. Scott, I may have texted you about this, but I think Ezra had the title of the episode is "What's Wrong with Donald Trump?" And he talked about what you just said, Keith, that like he went through all the facets of the man's personality, his record, what's known about him, what he said himself, and kind of laid out a case that goes beyond just the knee jerk, like he's a narcissist that people would throw out in 2016, but really did a deeper dive. And it was interesting, and I think he was largely correct on most of the points. But at the end of the day, I think when I texted Scott, I was like, Ezra's right. This is an interesting episode to me, but he's not persuading me. And I don't know who would be listening to Ezra Klein that is in the persuasion universe, right? Like, and what good does it to have this kind of content if we're just preaching to the choir? And I don't have a good answer.
Well, and, let's jump beyond Trump. But there's still a consequence of Trump, which is he's let a genie out of the bottle. He's opened up a Pandora's box of rhetoric and approaches to politics we thought we had buried and put away. And now they're loose, and we've got a whole generation of politicians that are trying to play with it. And this is one of the things, a couple of years ago, my colleague Kirby Goydell, Nick Davis, and I, we published this book called Democracy's Meanings. And it's about how do people think about democracy and what does it mean. And in doing that, we found 4 categories of ways that people think about democracy. But the one that was most intriguing and most frightening is you had people who believe in process democracy, believe in majority vote, but they don't want and they want certain civil liberties guarantees, but they don't want government to do much. Okay. Then you got some people who believe in majority voting, and they want all sorts of civil liberties protections, and they want a big social welfare state. And that's actually about 40% of America. And then you got this group in the middle who are, they're willing to give a little bit on liberties in order to have order. Yeah, they're willing to give a little bit on having a social welfare state in order to have order. They don't think government should be small. but they're willing to give on all these points. And those are the moderates that, they trim their sails one way or the other. Then there's this 10% of the electorate. They're called the indifferents. And they don't think that anything matters having democracy. They don't really care for it. And it's 10% of the electorate. And what's funny is they're not the people you think they are. They're not this redneck sitting out in the woods with a militia gear and a Confederate flag. No. They're younger, they're more racially diverse, and they're more gender diverse than any other part of the electorate. There's a significant cluster of people under 35. It's not that they gave up, they've never bought in. And if they show up and they vote against democracy, it can tip the balance.
So I would like to use that as kind of a jumping off point for the next phase of this discussion, because we could literally spend, the three of us could spend 4 hours in here talking about the horse race and every which way.
We're going to need another bottle.
Right? Like, I would really like to know, I would love to hear your perspective, Keith, on no matter what happens in November, in 2 weeks, or a week from Tuesday, in 10 days, I would love to hear your perspective on what happens next, right? So I'll give you like a couple scenarios, right? So like I got real dark a few weeks ago when I was thinking about this. I was like, because okay, I don't foresee, like, let's say Donald Trump wins, right? I don't foresee Donald Trump ever voluntarily relinquishing power, right? So, and maybe I'm crazy, but I could foresee a scenario where Donald Trump wins. He's constitutionally prohibited from running for another term as president, but he says in 2 years, I'm going to do it anyway, right? And I'm going to do it because my first term didn't count because the Democrats were obstructionist and then the Russia hoax. So he says, I'm going to run anyway, right? The Supreme Court says, the Supreme Court says, no, you can't do that, right? But a bunch of GOP legislators, right, in GOP states around the country say, Trump's our guy. We're going to put him on our ballot anyway, right? So Trump is on the ballot along with whoever the Democratic candidate is, right? There's an election in 2028. Trump loses by definition, one, because he's an illegitimate candidate, and two, he is not on the ballot in enough states to make it possible for him to win. So then the election happens. The Democratic candidate wins. Trump declares the election illegitimate because he was not allowed to be on the ballot in all of these states. And now we have an actual, real constitutional crisis because some states are going to mobilize the National Guard. Trump's going to try and use the military and prevent, that's one scenario. I'm curious to see what your thoughts are. Okay. Right.
I just want to point out that he would be like 82.
Well, I'm pretty sure his dad died when he was 95. So,
okay. Well, so it's possible.
And, I've never seen his health records. I have no idea what his medical problems are, but
No one does.
But I mean, we do know, I think pretty reliably, like, he doesn't smoke, right? He doesn't drink. He's, I don't know. I have no idea about Trump's health, but I know that genetically his dad lived for almost 20 years beyond how old he is now.
Right.
So, but I want to acknowledge that that's what I just laid out, I think, is an unlikely scenario, but I struggle to believe that it's a zero probability scenario, right? Mm-hmm. But let's say that he loses, or even that he wins, and that doesn't come to pass. We now have his running mate, right, the junior senator from Ohio, who's been confronted about the things that he is saying about Haitian immigrants in Ohio. And he's come out and said, he has been shown what you're saying is not true. And he says, if I have to create a story to get the media to talk about the things I want to talk about, that's what I'm going to do, right? He says that, no, Donald Trump didn't win the election because the media didn't cover the Hunter Biden laptop story the way that I thought that it should have been covered. Mm-hmm. And that's censorship. So yeah, that election was illegitimate. We now have this person who presents, I think, as a much more polished version of Donald Trump, saying things in a way that sound smart and well-reasoned, right? Yeah. But then you dig into it and it's like, this is kind of batshit crazy, right? And then you combine that with what you mentioned earlier, this new normal of we're going to contest the election, we're going to try not to certify it, we're going to litigate this. And so I guess my question from all of that, Keith, what do you think about those scenarios? And as a society that is small d democratically governed, where do we go from here?
They always say in my business, you should never, as an expert witness, I was always instructed to never accept a hypothetical. Okay. And as a pollster and as a commentator, I was always instructed myself, always explain, never predict. But I also write murder mysteries. Okay. And it's a fun scenario. Okay? It's a fun scenario. Intellectually, it's an intellectually fun scenario. But it depends upon a variety of things. It depends upon the military being so compromised that it is willing to accept an unconstitutional order, and in particular an unconstitutional order to actually get involved in politics. It requires officers and enlisted men in National Guards to accept an unlawful order from a governor to engage in politics.
If he invokes the Insurrection Act?
Here's the thing, but again, then we're off to court, right?
Right.
It requires every federal judge who has a lifetime appointment, lifetime tenure, and already has substantial protection because they're all used to living under the threat of drug dealers anyway, right?
Sure.
It requires them to be willing to completely compromise their integrity on the bench. And always remember what we said, that if Jesus Christ ever came back to walk the earth again, he would come as a federal district judge so he could have real power. Okay? So, I actually still have a good bit of faith in the judicial system, in part because we had, 71 lawsuits after the last election. Only
Right.
one succeeded, and even then it didn't succeed on any critical point. It succeeded only on a technical merit.
Does the judiciary matter if it's ignored?
Okay, so now we're back to Andrew Jackson saying,
Right.
saying the Supreme Court has made their decision, I've made mine, we're moving the Indians out, right? Or Joseph Stalin, who observed how many divisions does the Pope have? Well, we found out with John Paul II quite a few. And that's why I bring this up, is sometimes values matter.
Sure.
And opinion matters, and broad publics matter. And it's a question of either you're going to have an electoral democracy with accountability and control, or you don't. And before we came on, we were talking about a variety of things, and we asked the question: is democracy in danger? And of course it is. It's always in peril. It's just a question of how. You have to get to that scenario and allow it to act. But the problem is, right now, for the first time, we've got a political party in the United States, at least in modern history, that appears to have divorced itself from the idea of popular accountability, electoral accountability, and democracy. It's only about power, right? It's only about power. And that's new. That's brand new. We've got a generation of politicians in that party that are buying in. They've taken the concept that Democrats fall in love, Republicans fall in line, and they've fused them together and fallen in line behind a model that is not consistent with the values of the Republic. It just isn't. It is not consistent with the values of the Republic. They make up a history to go with it that suits the outcome they want, much in the same way that in the 19th century, Southern Protestants would make up a theology that justified slavery. We've done this in the past in America, and that's why you have to be diligent and vigilant.
Well, and this is not the first time that
I didn't answer the question. Also, I acknowledge this.
I wasn't going to call. I wasn't going to call you out on that, but
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure.
Well, I was going to say, it's not the first time that a president has tried to marry power and political position, right? I mean,
Right.
That's probably happened more times than not. This time is a little bit more complete, though. Why is that? What is the environment that this has allowed this to happen?
We used to have a thing in America called the Democratic Consensus, which is
small d Democratic.
Small d Democratic Consensus, that we would count the votes as cast. The winners would take power, and the winners and losers wouldn't shoot each other in the streets. Okay, that was the consensus. And we'd have peaceful transitions of power, even in the midst of a civil war. James Buchanan handed power to Abraham Lincoln. Okay, in the midst of civil war, we had a peaceable transition of power amidst war. It can be done. It has been done. This is new because for the last 50 years, for all of our lives, we've seen an erosion of trust in institutions, not just governing institutions, but every institution. We've seen the rise of conspiracy and opinion-based rather than fact-based interpretation of science. In particular, for the three of us in the room who've got a strong foundation in science, that's remarkably disturbing, right? And we've talked. It's a shame that everybody couldn't hear our pregame, which was a much more fascinating conversation that touched on every element of this, right? But also we obliterated and destroyed civic education. We polarized everything. We decided to sort our friends on the basis of politics. And we became thin-skinned and edgy and judgmental. But the other thing is, we don't have a good basis for the democratic consensus. We lived a real long time on World War II. We lived for a real long time on World War II, well into past our teen years, into our 20s at least. World War II was the last good war. It had clean villains, right? It had clean heroes. And also, Hollywood loves it because the Nazis are so stylish. Kurt Vonnegut said that. They've got stylish uniforms. We need to do World War II movies. But there is underlying that something else, which was there was a sense of greater purpose that came out of that war, and the women and men who fought it, both at home and abroad, that they built institutions that mattered. They actually pushed back against segregation. They did change the world in a very institutional way. They set the foundation for the best of what we have. And now we're squandering it.
Yeah.
Can a moment like that happen again?
Well, I mean, not to
like won a world war, right? But like, is there?
It may take one.
I mean, it is.
I was being glib there.
Yeah. Of course, obviously, but yeah. But I wonder what that like. What is the inflection point?
Well, the pandemic was supposed to do that. We see how it turned out.
I mean,
yeah.
You talk about the erosion of experience. I mean, I had a patient today. So it's a new patient came to see me. And I knew going into the room that they were very opposed to taking a certain class of medications for their cholesterol, right? And I said, and she told me I don't want to take one of those. My last doctor told me I needed one, and I don't want to take one. And I said, okay, can I ask what it is about these medicines that you don't like or you don't? And she tells me, well, I've just read all of these things that they're bad and they cause all these side effects and you have all these problems and I'm sorry, when it comes to this particular medicine, I don't trust doctors. And I said, okay, well, when you say you've read a lot of stuff, where do you read it? And she says, just the stuff I see on my phone. And I was like, okay, all right. And you say you don't trust doctors. Can I ask you, why is that? And she says, well, and she got kind of sheepish and she's like, I mean, I feel bad because I don't want to use this term. And I was like, it's okay. You can use whatever term you want. She's like, I just feel like doctors have been brainwashed to think that these medicines are so good for you when like there's all this stuff that says that they're so bad. And I said, okay. Well, I said, and we talked about it for a little bit. And I said, I'm not going to try and force you to take one of them. If you don't want to take it, you don't have to take it. I said, I will tell you. I said, I don't think we're brainwashed. I said, I can tell you, I have read the studies on these medicines of millions and millions and millions of patients, and that this would be a medicine that would be good for you. But if you don't want to take it, that's okay. I said, but can I ask you a question? She said, yes. And I said, I don't mean to be like direct, and I certainly don't want you to feel like I'm talking to you in a way that's condescending. And she said, that's okay. You can ask me. I said, if you were on an airplane and you were about to fly into a storm, and the pilot said, ladies and gentlemen, we've got a storm up ahead. I'm sorry there's going to be a delay, but this is really, really dangerous. We need to fly around this storm because if we try and fly through it, it's going to be bad. I said, but then there's 5 or 6 passengers in your row who said, I don't know. We were on a flight one time and we flew into a storm like this and it was fine. So I don't want to be late. I think we should just go ahead and just fly right through that storm. I said, can I ask you, who would you listen to? And she kind of laughed and she looked at me. She's like, I mean, I'd want to listen to the pilot who knows what he's doing. I was like, okay, just food for thought.
But the problem is also that some of the people she probably read or listened to are physicians, or at least said they were physicians, right? Like they were, wherever there's money to be made, someone's going to say what they got to say.
We also had a conversation about how what you see on your phone doesn't have to be real. And while you think that physicians and big pharma have this nefarious incentive to get you to take medicine for your cholesterol, you should also consider that the people who are saying this to you on your phone also have incentives.
Right.
And you should ask, do you think that I have an incentive to help you with your health? Or do you think that this person on your phone has an incentive to help you be more healthy?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to make you feel better about something, though. Most lay people are okay. I spent, before the podcast, we were talking about the work I've been doing on historic courthouse architecture, right? Spent 4 years driving around all of Georgia. I've been to every county seat in Georgia. in their courthouses, photographing them, talking to the people that work in them, going to the diner on the square, visiting people in there, stopping at a truck stop, going to a peach stand, whatever. And I met a lot of really great people.
Oh, yeah.
And Republican, Democrat, old, young, black, white, Hispanic, Asian. And the thing about them, I go into these communities, I go to these little bitty towns, and they love their courthouse, they love their county, they love their neighbors, and generally speaking, they're feeling pretty good about their lives. There are struggles, but at the grassroots, most people I would talk to were feeling pretty good. Maybe, the economy's never good enough. There's always a struggle. But they were solid people who would be there for their neighbor. I think there are a lot of people out there, and we're spending too much time looking at this weird, bizarre echo chamber that Elon Musk bought, and not enough time just out there actually knowing people and being tangibly engaged with them. Being back to being tactile Americans, I guess, where you can actually touch things.
100%.
Yeah. And I'm seeing the same thing when I go out in rural Texas.
Yeah. I said something similar, I think, to Scott the other day, looking back at the last couple of elections and then using that to inform how I am viewing the 2024 election, and that in 2016, with the micro-targeting, like the Trump campaign really had it, and a lot of it was based on Facebook. I mean, there was a big leaning in there. And then in 2020, middle of the pandemic, there had been a big shift, I think, collectively in society towards Twitter as just a pipeline of information about the pandemic, about what's happening, what the numbers are, a lot of stuff, right? Black Lives Matter. There's a lot of things that happened on Twitter. Many of us used it before, right? But it became more mainstream for the presidential election in 2020 in a way that it hadn't before. And so I've kind of thought about those as the Facebook election and the Twitter election. And then this year I expect it to be the TikTok election. And certainly that plays a role in reaching young voters who, if they turn out, could change things, but that's remains to be seen. But the thing that I hear more is about relationships, about knocking doors, about phone calls rather than text messages. So, even 2 years ago, we texted 100,000 people to get out the vote, like through our volunteers. And this year we haven't done any of that, or very, very little, because we have placed a premium on the quality of the relationship. Because, like you, Keith, when I'm out in rural Oklahoma, or even here in the metro for that matter, the conversations I have are about people who want to be known, want to be heard, and feel like all the other channels are too loud or too busy, and they feel forgotten about. And in years past or cycles past, those were voters that candidates might reach through digital channels. But now I think enough people are probably skeptical of just the dumpster fire on Twitter, and Facebook is too busy, and the opportunity to sit in a diner or a truck stop or whatever and actually talk to people makes a much bigger impact on their willingness to vote, and arguably who they vote for, or what they are voting on if it's a policy issue.
So yes, I agree, but I'm going to say I don't want to say push back. It's not even that's not even what I mean. But but I think what happens is I think that's correct, right? Like I think people crave real relationship, and I echo what you said about these folks that you met in Georgia. I mean, the area of town that I practice in, I have lots of patients. I have patients I have patients that are multimillionaires from the middle of Oklahoma City. I have patients that are farmers from rural areas that are out northwest of town, and everything in between. And I will say, my patients as a group, they are wonderful people, and you could certainly make guesses about their politics from the demographic information that we know can be pretty predictive. But I agree with your sentiment that they are by and large, these are wonderful people, no matter who they're voting for, who love their neighbors, who love what they do, and who for the most part feel pretty good about their lives. But I think what happens though is, even though they all crave, and we all crave these real relationships, the online, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Instagram, whether it's TikTok, Twitter, we know these things are algorithms, and we know that these algorithms are designed in a way to fuel those dopamine receptors, right? It becomes this echo chamber that is a feedback loop. Like they are feeding something in us.
Yeah.
Right?
What was that? I can't remember where I saw it, but there was a recent study that was out that was talking about how activated rage, if activated too long, is increasingly difficult to turn off.
Yes.
And that's part of what we're talking about. And that's probably the best reason to disconnect from these things. And, I took a look at Twitter and Facebook back during the pandemic, and I said, I'm going to treat this thing like an asteroids machine or a pinball machine. I'm going to stick some quarters in it now and then just play with it a little bit, but I'm not going to take it seriously. I'm just going to start putting up pictures. Much happier, because of that. And, no one's opinion on Twitter really matters that much, except Taylor Swift. Okay, yes, let us make that clear, right? Is Taylor Swift boat Veterans for Justice coming next? I don't know. Okay,
that's funny. So
I stole it from a month ago, but that's okay.
Also, going back to the discussion of like democracy more broadly, and this is going to shift away a little bit, I think, from the presidential race, but to a topic that I think we all care about too, and that's electoral policy, right? So one of the things, and listeners know this about me, obviously this is an area I care a lot about. There are 7 states plus Washington, D.C., where the phrase democracy is on the ballot is like actually true, right? So those states are by and large voting to either pass or uphold open primaries and ranked choice voting and campaign finance reform. And D.C. is one of them. And this is unprecedented. This is, prior to this, Maine had ranked choice. Alaska had ranked choice and open primaries in their Final Four model, and they've got to defend it this year. But it's states you might not expect. It's Arizona, it's Nevada, it's Colorado, it's Idaho. It's Ohio is voting on independent redistricting, trying to end gerrymandering there. Maine's voting on campaign finance reform. There's a bunch of others. And I think this could, if successful, I'd like to say when successful, but I don't want to jinx anything a week out, but change how we run our elections, right? Like how people are elected. And earlier, Scott mentioned incentives. And I use this phrase a lot, that the way that our electoral system is designed right now, incentivizes candidates to run to, we'll say their base, right? To run to the extremes, because that's the voters that tend to turn out. And by making some changes to how they get elected, for example, open or unified primary system, where every candidate is open to every voter from the get-go, it changes like how they campaign and ideally how they govern. And Keith, I know it's something you think a lot about.
Yeah.
Share your thoughts.
Well, first of all, I think this reveals something deeper, which is it's not that we have red states, blue states. We have states want to have a high degree of open participation and want to be creative with their elections. We have states that are incredibly traditional and want to make it very difficult to participate and very difficult to change things. And Oklahoma is one of those states that wants to make it difficult. The efforts to try and make it increasingly difficult to get ballot initiatives passed, messing with signature requirements and deadlines and validation. There are a lot of things that go on inside the rules that make things needlessly difficult. Texas makes it hard to register to vote for certain people because they want to control and limit the electorate because demographics are not on conservative side in Texas for the next 10 years. So it's easier to change things in states where you've got relatively new constitutions. These states are 100, 130 years old. They were very progressive when they shaped themselves. And so Idaho could pass this. It's also very homogenous, but they could pass it. So the first thing we have to recognize is there's something else going on besides conservative and liberal. But we're going to end up with 2 types of states. We're going to end up with states where it's easy to participate. There are going to be creative mechanisms that grab as much information about voter preferences as possible and translate it into government. That's what all these tools do. And then there are going to be hidebound states that are going to have closed party primaries. They're going to have gerrymandered districts and rigid structures and segregated voting districts for all intents and purposes. And participation is going to go down because that's what happens when you do all these things. The electorate gets smaller and smaller. And all that's going to do is distort, in national elections, the national popular participation level relative to what the Electoral College does. We're already seeing it. States that Democrats win tend to be high turnout states. Simple as that.
I feel incredibly vindicated right now because, Oklahoma has the lowest participation of any state, and people ask why. I'm like, well, there's many reasons, and I don't have the data together yet, but I suspect that there is this institutional reason, right? That voters feel disempowered. They feel like their vote doesn't matter and this is not a partisan statement, on both sides, right? I know a ton of Republicans and independents and Democrats, and certainly the libertarians, who there's only 20,000 of them, but
libertarians
who feel like whether they show up or not, it doesn't matter because the decision is going to be made for them. And that is true, particularly if they don't show up, right? But if they did, like we have more eligible voters who don't vote than do. And that tells me that, like, if even a third, a half of those voters actually showed up, the outcomes would look markedly different than what they are right now. And so as we, at least as I begin to strategize for 2026, where it's an open governor's seat and all the other statewide electeds will have at least one state question on the ballot, almost certainly more than that. There's a lot of ways. I want to believe that there are a lot of ways, a lot of reasons that voters, a lot of opportunities for voters to lean in ways that they haven't in the past. Because they might, I think my goal, my job is to help those voters realize that they have more power than they think and that they will use that power to decide the outcome for the election. And I don't know if that's the case, but I look at states like Colorado and Nevada in particular, both Western states, who most of us would say are very different from us. And I don't know. I just see them as like being farther along on this journey than Oklahoma is. Both of those states have a majority of voters that are unaffiliated or independent. Same with Alaska, right? These are all like, at one point, frontier states. At one point, Oklahoma was a frontier state. There's some populist element there. There's still some deeply partisan elements there. But I think as voters get fed up with the two-party duopoly and disaffiliate, then they float around a little bit trying to figure out what this means for them. And then they have to come back and say, I want to have agency as a voter in this status. And in order to do that, what is that going to require? And in some cases, it requires structural electoral reform, right?
Well, first of all, these people have got to be thinking there's something they're supposed to get from government or from the state or society they're not getting. And I increasingly think, well, first of all, the idea that if we mobilize one part of the electorate, somehow it shifts things, ignores the fact that other parts of the electorate will get mobilized as well. One side doesn't mobilize and the other side sits still. You always have to assume that the other side is going to mobilize. You also can't assume that the people that are not voting will only vote in one direction.
Right.
It doesn't work. Substantive evidence. When Alabama was forced to open the door for African Americans to vote in the 1960s, it led to more whites registering and voting who had not been voting than blacks who had not been registered and voting.
Oh, as like a retribution vote kind of thing?
Well, no, it was a mobilization thing, which is because it was one-party competition and blacks were excluded from the vote, a lot of people just didn't bother to participate. I mean, 1940, South Carolina, which was a medium-sized state back then, just below the average size, had a total of 96,000 people vote for president.
Wow.
In the whole state. And 96% of them voted for that noted communist Franklin Roosevelt. Okay? The most conservative state in the Union at the time, 96% of the voters voted for Franklin Roosevelt because they were big D Democrats. And that's what they did. They didn't know what Republicans were until Strom Thurmond switched in 1964. Never heard of the thing. My gosh, there was a party. Oh, Lincoln's gone? Okay, we can do that. But yeah, it's... I think opening the door, though, and this is what my Australian friends always tell me, that if you have full participation, you don't have to worry about mobilization. If you don't have to worry about mobilization, now you have to go to persuasion, which means it's about policy. I'm not completely convinced, but I think it's enough to change things.
It's interesting, too, because you said that people are, a lot of people feel like there's something from the government that that they're not getting, something they want that they're not getting. I also feel like a lot of people right now, there's a big contingent of people who vote because they feel like someone else is getting something from the government that they shouldn't be getting.
Well,
Right?
Yeah.
Like, because I would love to see a universe where we vote on where we vote on policy. I feel like so much of our politics right now is you're not showing up to vote for, you're showing up to vote again. Even, and this is true on both sides, right? You're showing up to vote against the other side.
Yeah. It's kind of fun though. In that space, Thomas Frank wrote that book years ago, What's the Matter with Kansas? And he couldn't understand why lower middle class evangelicals were voting Republican. And I've always contended that the reason is that there's a limit to democracy, and this is part of what we talk about in our book also. Democracy's meanings is democracy over promises. It can never deliver economically what people want. It's inadequate to that outcome. No government can. So looking to government for solution and salvation is weak metal compared to people who have got a church and have got a community that comes to them, helps them out when they're in need, and does it in the Spirit of God. It's a very, very hard thing to argue against a faith community that delivers by arguing that the state that doesn't deliver will somehow deliver. And that's why Kansas turned out the way it did, which was kind of a hot mess.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, but that's Oklahoma. It's a lot of America. So from time, I spent a lot of time burning up the road going back and forth to Texas because I'm home in Oklahoma, home in Texas. I'm bi-coastal, both sides of the Red River. So I'm going through all the podcasts, all the books on tape, but I'll also listen to movies and TV in the background, right? So this week I started re-listening to and sort of watching out of the corner of my eye, All in the Family, which I used to watch when I was a kid. So I'm on episode 5, season 1, right? And I'm listening to Archie Bunker and I'm going, wow, he and Donald Trump are both from Queens. And they do sound alike, and the rhetoric's the same.
Ed O'Neill is one of my favorite actors of all time.
Yeah. Yeah, so Ed Asner. I mean, not Ed, Carol O'Connor. Carol O'Connor, yeah.
Ed O'Neill, also funny, but
Yeah.
that's Married with Children.
Married with Children.
You're right. That's not our.
And Ed
that's,
Asner was Lou
you're
Grant.
Right, you're right.
So-
You're right.
And all you have to do is picture which one of them would say, "They're eating the dogs," and then
Yeah.
Okay, not Ed O'Neill.
Well, meathead. Right. But yeah, and yet again, in the room, Scott, Andy's the only one who got it right.
Thank you for that. I will accept.
Rimshot gift.
That's right. Yeah. As we wrap up for today, I'd like to leave people with either a positive note or an opportunity for action. I would imagine most of our listeners are feeling various degrees of despondence about the election right now, particularly because Oklahoma doesn't really play a role in the outcome of the presidential race because of the Electoral College, as far as we know. We could always surprise America. Wouldn't that be great? I would love to be on the news when Oklahoma unexpectedly went for the other candidate, and everyone's brains are melting. But I don't expect that this year. But
That's
Keith,
wise.
no, that's right.
Well, I got to do that in 2002 with Brad Henry. So,
Oh yeah.
oh yeah,
Good. I'll take some notes from you later about what to do in that situation.
you drink heavily and celebrate.
Okay. Well, that's at least part of my plan. What can voters, particularly in Oklahoma, not just this year, right? But I think my brain is starting to look past the election to the next couple of years for how we organize, how we communicate, how we build towards the future that Oklahomans want. Keith, in your expertise and your perspective,
Yeah.
what can Oklahomans do that is meaningful and useful towards that future?
Take your kid to go vote with you. It's a good one. But related to that, if you want to have some fun and you like the internet, go to the Bad Voter site and check out the address of all your neighbors and see if they've been voting lately. If they haven't, take them to go vote with you.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Badvoter.org, I
Yeah.
think. I think it's still active.
Yeah,
David
and that's
Clovers.
David will appreciate the fact that we gave him a shout out.
He will.
Yeah.
I and I say this a lot. We assume that our friends who post about politics all the time vote all the time, and that is not the
That
case.
is not the case.
I have a friend who, posts almost daily something political. She is very impassioned about politics, And then she moved like 3 years ago and just updated her voter registration like right before the deadline. And I was I was like, well, wait. So I looked up and I was like, you haven't voted in like a couple of years. And so we had to have a conference. She's like, I know.
We can run her for governor.
That's right. Very true.
Sorry. That was not partisan. That was merely an empirical observation,
Yeah,
nothing else. Yeah.
I'll say this, the answer to your question too. I
Yeah.
would say, don't be afraid to talk about politics, right? I think one of the worst things that we do, and certainly not the only reason, but one of the reasons, I mean, there's a lot like in terms of online, but one of the reasons we are so siloed, right, is because people say like, what we get together at Thanksgiving, the two things you don't talk about, right? Religion and politics. No, these are exactly the things that we should talk about, right? Like it is, we have to learn how to talk about our politics with each other and understand that having that conversation, right? You and I talking about politics and having a conversation where we disagree about policy or who we're voting for or why it's good or why it's bad, that's not an attack, right? That's not like you and I could sit here and talk about football, and it would be painful because you would talk about the Georgia Bulldogs and I'd talk about my Oklahoma Sooners, and that's not going to go well for me, right? But we're not going to leave that conversation with me feeling attacked because you're coming at me with all this Georgia Bulldogs nonsense, right? We have to learn to talk with each other about our politics in a way that makes us unafraid to discuss things with people that are not going to agree with us.
Well, I'll tell you, the whole seminar I'm teaching at TCU this term is called Making Modern America the American Ideal. And it's about looking at the ideals of the framers and the origins of the Republic and where the aspirational are real, but mainly it's about having constructive discourse and conversation in the classroom and then extending it out to the world. And one of the books I had them read was Art Brooks' The Conservative Heart, which was about that exact thing. And it's his call for conservatives to listen, be thoughtful, and try and engage people and converse and convince people of the merit of their substantive arguments rather than just attacking. And, we could bring Art in here and he'd do great in this conversation. We'd even agree on some stuff. Mm-hmm. But it's about, Scott, you're absolutely right. It's that thing. It's that sitting down and having coffee, breaking bread, spending time with people, and trying to find our way to where the problem is. The border is a place where we should have a conversation that's constructive. What are we trying to achieve? Mm-hmm. And what do those outcomes look like? But the first thing we have to agree to is an objective structure of history and an objective set of facts and an objective set of problems. We never get to that because we're so busy trying to win and yell at each other and throw mud.
Yeah. 100%. 100%.
On the national side, I work with a lot of groups that are in the democracy space, but they live in what we call the bridging neighborhood, right? Groups like Bridge USA and the Bridge Alliance, the Listen First Coalition, even like Heath Mayo and the Principles First group. And sometimes I get frustrated because there's a lot of like good conversation, but not actionable change. And this is in my perspective. But I have been thinking a lot lately about how we respond, including like how we, let's fix this, respond in the next 3 months, 6 months, right? There will be an election. There will be an outcome. How do we respond in that space to, honestly, the emotional needs of our fellow Oklahomans that are struggling to say, like, this is not the future I wanted, and I'm worried. I'm confused about the future. Whether it goes the way that I want or not doesn't matter. But like helping people heal together as a community, as a society, is like a very noble cause.
Yeah,
I think.
And
yeah, everyone's nodding in agreement. So I think we're at the end of the episode. Well, let's wrap up from there. Scott, thanks for being here, as always.
I mean, I'd love to say that I wouldn't miss it, but I've missed the last lot. So
You've got a key. The door is always open.
Thanks, man.
Keith, thanks for being here again as well.
it's good to be here. And do I get a key? Because I'd like to come back again, too.
Please. You're welcome. We can make that happen. Listeners, thank you for being here as well. You know already, the election's on November 5th, and you know that you are going to vote. What you may not know is that I need you to talk to your friends. Text your friends, your uncle, your cousin, your nephew, even if you disagree, right? We want participation. We want people to to make their voice heard, please reach out. Send them a text message. Just say, hey, I hope you're going to vote. If you want to direct them to our website, that's a great resource. letsfixthis.org/vote is our voting hub. We've got links from there to the state election board, to the voter guide, to all the resources you might need, including some ridiculous but helpful videos from me. It would be great. Friends, I will probably not record next week, but I will see you on election night, November 5th on Fox 25. I'm looking forward to it. If you have specific data points you think are interesting, send them my way. You can always reach us at podcast@letsfixthis.org. On that note, have a great week.